My name is Alara Vance, and for as long as I can remember, my life has been shaped by the scent of old paper and the quiet weight of unspoken rules. I grew up in a house filled with books, a two-story colonial in the sleepy, tree-lined suburbs of a city called Port Blossom. My father, a history professor, and my mother, a woman who treated good deeds like a competitive sport, raised me to be studious, polite, and above all, considerate. But in our family, considerate had a very specific definition. It meant making myself smaller, dulling my own light, so that my adopted sister, Kala, wouldn't have to stand in my shadow. Kala came into our lives when I was 16, a whirlwind of bruised silence and defiant eyes. She was 15, fresh from a foster care system that had, as my mother often reminded me, chipped away at her soul. My parents, particularly my mother, saw her as a project, a fragile bird with a broken wing that only their boundless love could mend. I saw her as a sister. I desperately wanted a friend, a confidant, someone to share the quiet corners of my life with. I tried, with all the clumsy earnestness of a 16-year-old, to welcome her. The first lesson in our new family dynamic came a few months after she arrived. I won the state-level oratory competition, a victory that felt like the culmination of years of battling my own shyness. The prize was a beautiful, heavy crystal eagle, its wings outstretched as if caught in a moment of pure, soaring freedom. I clutched it all the way home, my heart a hummingbird in my chest. Kala was the first person I showed it to. "Look what I won," I whispered, holding it out for her to see. "Isn't it beautiful?" She stared at it, her expression unreadable. Then, her face hardened into a mask of cold fury. Before I could react, she snatched the crystal eagle from my hands. Her voice was a low, venomous hiss that seemed to suck all the air from the room. "You don't deserve this." The eagle arced through the air and shattered against the hardwood floor, a sound like a gunshot in the quiet house. Shards of crystal skittered across the polished wood, glinting like frozen tears. Then, as if the act had drained all her strength, she crumpled to the floor, sobbing. My mother rushed in, her eyes taking in the scene, me, standing in shocked silence, and Kala, a heap of misery on the floor. Her gaze settled on me, not with concern, but with a weary disappointment. She knelt and gathered Kala into her arms, stroking her hair. Over Kala's shuddering shoulders, my mother's voice was soft but sharp, like a shard of the broken trophy itself. "Alara, we've talked about this. Don't shine so brightly where she can see." That one sentence became the unwritten constitution of our household. Love, I learned, meant watching my achievements be dismantled, my joy be curdled into guilt. It meant forgiving without apology, understanding without explanation, and always putting Kala's healing before my own well-being. My mother had a story she would tell, a narrative she polished like a precious stone. Kala, she'd explain, had been the scapegoat in her last foster home. Not physical abuse, nothing so clear-cut, but 1,000 tiny cruelties designed to make her feel worthless. While the biological daughter got birthday parties, Kala got a curt, "Happy birthday." While the other girl wore new clothes, Kala got faded hand-me-downs. Her good grades were ignored, her mistakes were magnified. "You don't deserve nice things" had become their family mantra, a poison they dripped into her ear until she believed it. Now, she was making it mine. The next few years were a masterclass in self-effacement. I learned to read the weather of Kala's moods. 10 minutes of her staring at me with that flat, empty gaze meant destruction was imminent. 15 minutes meant I should brace for total annihilation. I learned to hide anything that mattered: journals, prized books, letters from friends. I never celebrated an acceptance letter or a good grade where she might see it. The future I was so carefully building had to be kept under wraps, a secret project I worked on in the dead of night. It wasn't until one perfect, sun-drenched afternoon last spring, 8 years after Kala's arrival, that the pattern was finally broken. I received my acceptance letter to the Northwood University School of Medicine. A lifetime of academic pressure, of imposter syndrome, and late nights crying into textbooks had all led to this one crisp envelope. For a few glorious hours, I was just Alara. Not Kala's trigger, not the family sacrifice, just a future doctor, dizzy with joy, scrolling through apartment listings in Waverly City, planning my escape. My mother came home to find me smiling, a rare and unguarded sight. "What's this?" she asked, a bright, brittle tone in her voice. I held up the letter. "I got in. Northwood." "Oh, darling, that's wonderful." She hugged me, but it felt like she was assessing the situation, calculating variables. "We need to plan how to make this work." Her eyes, however, told a different story. They were already looking past me, toward Kala. An hour later, after a performance of maternal pride, the truth slithered out. "Of course," she said, stirring her tea, "Kala will need to come with you. Waverly City has some excellent trauma programs, and she really can't handle you leaving right now. I'll even help with the rent if you get a 2-bedroom apartment." The image flooded my mind, stark and terrifying. Kala in my apartment. Kala with access to my study materials, my medical equipment, my future. The very sanctuary I was dreaming of turned into another cage. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "You know what happens. You know what she does when she sees me succeeding." "Oh, she hasn't had an episode in months," she lied, a cheerful, deliberate falsehood. As if Kala hadn't found my MCT prep books just last week and systematically ripped out every single chapter on organic chemistry. I stood my ground, my heart pounding. "No, she can't live with me." My mother's face hardened, the mask of the gentle nurturer dropping away to reveal the steely determination beneath. "If you want what's best for your sister," she snapped, her voice cold, "you would help her heal." This time, something inside me was different. I thought of the time, when I was 18, that Kala found my undergraduate acceptance letters. I hadn't realized they were missing until I sat down to dinner and noticed a faint white powder dusting my pasta. A strange, bitter smell rose from the plate. It was my mother's crushed-up sleeping pills. Kala, sitting across from me, had a small, triumphant smirk on her face. When I'd recoiled, my mother had launched into a lecture about my lack of humility, about the importance of not bragging. She didn't deny the poisoning, she was protecting the person who'd done it. That memory gave me strength. "No, Mom," I repeated, my voice clearer now. "Kala is not living with me. She can visit Waverly City. We can FaceTime. I'll come home for holidays. I'll even help you research trauma programs here, near home." "Then I'm not helping with any of your school expenses," she declared, her final trump card. A sense of weary resignation washed over me, but it was tinged with relief. "Fine," I sighed. "I'll take out more loans." The next 2 months were a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare. My mother called relatives, spinning a tale of how I was abandoning my fragile, traumatized sister. She brought Kala to the university bookstore where I worked part-time, ostensibly to practice separation therapy. Kala just stood there for 10 solid minutes, staring at the Northwood University sweatshirt I was wearing, her eyes burning holes in the fabric. Then, with a sudden, violent shove, she sent a tower of expensive art history books crashing to the floor. "You don't deserve this," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear over the gasps of other customers. My manager quietly asked my mother not to bring her back. The week before my white coat ceremony, the culmination of all my dreams, my aunt called. "Your mother bought plane tickets for herself and Kala," she warned me. "She says you can't exclude Kala from important family milestones. She told me Kala has been staring at your white coat picture online for days." I knew what that meant. In our silent, coded language, it was a declaration of war. My mother had spent 8 years teaching me that Kala's trauma was a sacred text and my life was just the footnote. Every destroyed achievement, every shattered dream, came with a matching excuse about foster care. But I wasn't a scared, people-pleasing 16-year-old anymore. I was a 24-year-old woman on the verge of becoming a doctor. I knew my worth, even if my own family refused to see it. And I was ready to protect it. So, I started planning. First, I went onto my social media and changed the location of the ceremony. I wrote a breezy post about a last-minute venue change, moving it to a different auditorium on the far side of campus. Next, I called the student affairs office at the medical school and, in a hushed, embarrassed voice, explained the situation. The security supervisor, a kind, burly man named Gus, was incredibly understanding. "Don't you worry, miss," he said in a gravelly, reassuring voice. "I'll keep an eye out for anyone matching their description." I also enlisted my new roommate, Lena, as my lookout. She already knew the whole Kala saga, having listened with a mixture of horror and fascination over late-night study sessions. The morning of the ceremony, I was awake at 5, my nerves a tangled knot in my stomach. I retrieved my pristine white coat from its hiding place in the back of Lena's closet. I'd learned my lesson about keeping important things in my own room. I dressed in the bathroom with the door locked, even wedging a chair under the knob. Paranoid, maybe. But you try living with someone who laced your dinner with prescription pills. Lena drove me to campus in her beat-up sedan, my own car being too recognizable. I kept checking my phone. My mother had already texted a dozen times, all variations of "Where are you?" and "Kala is so excited to support you." Support. Like the time she'd supported my SAT scores by feeding the official report to our paper shredder. We parked in a distant lot, and I slipped into the correct building through a back entrance. Gus was there, true to his word. He gave me a subtle thumbs up. "All quiet on the Western Front," he murmured. In the prep room, the air buzzed with excitement. My classmates were taking selfies, adjusting their clothes, their faces alight with a pure, uncomplicated joy that I envied. I sat in a corner, watching the door, my phone clutched in my hand. 30 minutes before the ceremony, it began to blow up. It was my mother, sending pictures of herself and Kala standing outside the wrong building, the one from my social media post. They looked confused, Kala dressed in an oddly formal, dark blue dress. The texts grew angrier. "Where are you, Alara? This isn't funny. Answer your phone now." I turned my phone off. The coordinator began lining us up. My hands were shaking, not from stage fright, but from the conditioned dread of hearing that familiar, hateful screech, "You don't deserve this." We walked into the auditorium. It was vast and filled with the warm hum of proud families. As we filed onto the stage, I scanned the crowd, my heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't see them. A small, fragile bubble of hope began to form in my chest. Maybe, just maybe, my plan had worked. The dean began his opening speech, his words about dedication and service washing over me. I was barely listening, my eyes still fixed on the entrance at the back of the hall. And then I saw her. Not Kala. My mother. She was at the main door, her face a blotchy red mask of fury as she argued with a security guard. She was pointing toward the stage, toward me. But Gus's man wasn't letting her in. She didn't have a ticket. In my careful planning, I'd conveniently forgotten to mention that the ceremony was a ticketed event. Alara Vance. My name echoed through the auditorium. I stood, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body, and walked across the stage. I felt the crisp fabric of the coat as the dean draped it over my shoulders. I shook his hand, smiled for the official photograph, and for the first time in 8 years, I celebrated a milestone without a shroud of fear. There were no flying trophies, no torn-up documents, no poison in my food. There was just me in my white coat at the threshold of my future. After the ceremony, I met Lena in the lobby. She was grinning, her eyes sparkling with vicarious victory. "You missed the show," she said. Apparently, my mother and Kala had arrived just as I was receiving my coat. Kala, upon seeing me on the Jumbotron, had tried to rush the stage, but security had intercepted her. My mother had created a scene, yelling about discrimination and trauma and family rights, until the curious stares of other parents shamed them into leaving, just moments before campus police arrived. On the drive back to our apartment, I turned my phone on. 47 missed calls. Over 100 texts. The last one, from my mother, was chillingly simple. "Come home immediately. We need to talk about your behavior." My behavior. Not Kala's attempt to ruin my ceremony. Not my mother's public meltdown. Mine. I didn't go home. Lena and I went to a celebratory dinner with a few friends. I wore my white coat the entire time. I took a dozen photos and posted every single one. For once, I refused to dim my light. I knew I had to go back to the house eventually. My car was there, my books, the remnants of my childhood. But something fundamental had shifted within me. I had stood up to them, outsmarted them, and the world hadn't ended. I had protected my own joy, and I had survived. A few days later, Lena drove me. We did a slow pass of the house first. Mom's car was in the driveway. The curtains were drawn. It looked peaceful, but I knew better. I texted my father, figuring he was the path of least resistance. He replied almost instantly. Mom is at her book club. Kala's in her room. Coast is clear. Still, I made Lena come inside with me. The house was unnervingly quiet. My father was in the kitchen, staring into a mug of coffee, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, worn down. He started to launch into a half-hearted lecture about family responsibility, but I cut him off. I'm just here to pack some things, Dad. His face fell. Are you serious, Alara? Yes. With Lena's help, I started emptying my room. Clothes, textbooks, my laptop, anything that mattered. My father just watched from the doorway, a ghost in his own home. We were carrying the last box down the stairs when the front door slammed open. My mother's voice, sharp and furious, echoed in the hall. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. I quickened my pace, but Kala was already there, blocking the doorway to my room. She stared past me at the empty shelves, the bare mattress, the blank walls. Her face was unnervingly blank. That was always worse than the rage. The staring began. I instinctively checked my watch. 1 minute. 2. Lena shifted nervously beside me. 3 minutes. 4. Kala's hands began to tremble. I braced myself for the explosion, but it never came. Instead, she just turned and walked away, back to her own room, shutting the door with a soft click. It was the most unsettling thing she had ever done. My mother appeared at the top of the stairs, her face a mask of rage. What do you think you're doing? I'm moving out, I said, my voice steady. She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You are not going anywhere. This family stays together. Kala needs you. I pushed past her, heading for the door. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. You're selfish, she hissed. You are traumatizing her all over again. I wrenched my arm free and kept walking. Dad was still in the kitchen, a statue of inaction. As we loaded the last box into Lena's car, my mother stood on the front lawn, her arms crossed. If you leave now, she shouted, her voice breaking, don't bother coming back for Thanksgiving. As we pulled away from the curb, I glanced back. I could see Kala's silhouette in her bedroom window, just standing there, watching me go. I found a tiny studio apartment, a small nest overlooking the Waverly River. It was mine. The quiet was the most luxurious thing I had ever owned. I spent my days studying, and my nights learning the simple, peaceful rhythm of a life lived for myself. The angry texts from my mother eventually slowed to a trickle of manipulative guilt trips. Kala isn't eating. Kala cries all night. I stopped reading them. Then my dad started texting. He was worried. Kala was acting strangely, he said. Not her usual destructive strange. A quiet, withdrawn strange. She'd been in her room for days. I almost caved, but Lena reminded me that Kala was a grown woman with parents to care for her. I was not her keeper. A week after I moved in, my dad showed up at my door. He looked exhausted. We need to talk, he said. He told me things I'd never known, about Kala's first few months with us, about how much worse her history was than Mom had ever let on. He said their therapist had warned them that Kala might fixate on me, that my success could feel like a personal attack to her. My mother had promised to manage it, to protect us both. Instead, my dad said, his voice thick with regret, she chose a side. And I let her. I'm so sorry, Alara. I should have protected you. Then he dropped the bombshell. Kala had found my address. She was downstairs, sitting in her car. She'd been there for hours. He wanted me to talk to her. He said she seemed different. I looked out my window. Sure enough, her familiar gray car was parked across the street. My blood ran cold. But this time, it was mixed with a weary anger. I was done hiding. For 3 days, she sat there. A silent, unnerving vigil. I jumped at every sound, triple-checked my locks. On the fourth morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked out of my building, straight to her car, and knocked on the window. She rolled it down. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. She had been crying. Kala never cried. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then she said something that shattered the foundation of our entire 8-year dynamic. I know what I did to you. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of fact. An acknowledgement. She reached into a tote bag on the passenger seat and pulled out a worn spiral notebook. I've been writing it all down, she said, her voice raspy. My therapist said it would help. I took the notebook. She told me about her old foster family, her version this time. How they had loved her, and then how their love had curdled when their own daughter was born. How "You Don't Deserve This" became the soundtrack to her life. When I saw you with that trophy, she said, looking at her hands, so happy and proud. I couldn't stand it. Because if you deserved good things, it meant they were right about me. She got out of the car and sat on the curb a careful distance away. She told me Mom had been pressuring her to come get me, to force me home. But for the first time, Kala had said no. She'd come here to warn me. Mom was planning an intervention. The whole family was supposed to confront me at Thanksgiving. She showed me the family group chat on her phone. Message after message condemning me. But threaded between them were Kala's defenses. Leave her alone. She deserves a life. This is Mom's fault, not hers. My destroyer had become my guardian. I finally opened the notebook. Page after page detailed her rage, her jealousy, her self-hatred. The last entry was from the night before. Alara deserves everything. I know that now. I just couldn't let myself feel it before. Watching her leave, it was the first time I felt like maybe I could be free too. Free from being the monster who haunts her. I handed the notebook back. I need time, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded. I know. She told me she was moving into a therapeutic group home. A place where my mother couldn't use her as a weapon anymore. Then she got in her car and drove away, leaving me on the curb with 8 years of trauma and the fragile, first shoots of something that felt like peace. Thanksgiving came. I spent it with Lena's loud, loving, wonderfully normal family. I turned my phone off for the entire day. That night, I had one text from Kala. They came. You weren't here. They're angry. Be careful. Mom's campaign escalated. She called my school, my landlord, my new part-time job at a campus coffee shop, trying to get me expelled, evicted, and fired. But I was prepared. I recorded everything, saved every screenshot Kala secretly forwarded to me. Hidden inside an envelope of hate mail from an aunt was a sticky note from Kala. Stay strong. I'm proud of you. It was the first time she'd ever said that. The breaking point was a protest. My mother, my father, and a handful of relatives, standing outside my medical building with printed signs, "Shame on Alara. Family abandonment is abuse." I was mortified. That night, I called my mother. I told her to meet me at a coffee shop. Alone. She showed up with my father and my aunt. But Kala came, too, sitting at a separate table, a silent sentry. I let my mother rant. Then I calmly laid out my evidence, the screenshots, the call logs, the letters. I recounted every major incident, from the crystal eagle to the sleeping pills. My father looked genuinely shocked. My mother had obviously given him a heavily censored version of events. When I finished, my mother was crying. Real tears. I just wanted to fix her, she sobbed. I thought if I loved her enough, she'd heal. I failed both of you. Kala stood up and walked to our table. She looked her mother in the eye. Stop, she said, her voice firm. You have to let her go. I'm getting help. I don't need her to suffer for me anymore. I laid out my terms. No more calls, no more protests, no more contact unless I initiated it. If they violated the boundary, I would get a restraining order. My father, his face etched with a new resolve, nodded. We will respect that, he said, looking at my mother. It's over. As I left, Kala walked me out. She handed me an envelope with cash. For the work you missed, she said. From my therapy fund. I haven't seen her in person since. My father and I text sometimes, simple, safe updates. On my birthday, I got a message from an unknown number. Happy birthday. You deserve all the good things. I knew it was her. I saved the contact. A year passed. I excelled in my classes. I made friends. I built a life in my small apartment, a life that was quiet and sturdy and entirely my own. My father sent me a letter my mother had written. It was 3 pages of accountability, of apologies without justifications. I read it and I kept it. Forgiveness felt like a distant country I wasn't ready to visit, but acknowledgement was a bridge I could stand on. Now, in my 2nd year, the work is harder, the hours longer. But every late night, every grueling exam, feels like a victory. This achievement, this future, is mine. It is built on a foundation of self-respect and hard-won peace. No one can throw this trophy at my head. No one can poison this success. It's a quiet celebration, happening every single day, and for the first time in my life, I don't have to hide the light. I can just let it shine.